Hello everyone, welcome to Learn DAX channel. My name is Siddesh and with this video we start solving our business problems. If you haven't watched the previous video in which we had imported the tables from Excel into Power BI, created those connections and tested those connections, I would really encourage you to go ahead, watch that video, create the data model in your Power BI and then start watching this video as that will help you to follow along in this video. So I will leave the link in the description. Be sure to check it out. So without further ado, let's get started with the business problems that we have for today's discussion. So the problems that we have today are, the first is we have to calculate the daily cumulative sales up to the current date. So what do I mean by the daily cumulative sales? So let's say today is the July 1st, tomorrow we have July 2nd, and day after tomorrow we have July the 3rd. And I have had a sales of, let's say, 100 on the first day, 50 on the second day, another 50 on the third day. So this is simply my sales. But what cumulative sales is, simply you just kind of keep stacking the one value over the other. So the day one sales were 100. So now the day two sales are going to be 100 plus 100 plus 50, which amounts to 150. And the day three sales are going to be 100 plus 50 plus 50, which amounts to be 200. So that's cumulative sales. So this is sales and this is cumulative sales. So sales is something that I can simply get using drag and drop, which I'll just show you. So I go to Power BI and I simply get my order date from my orders table. So let me pull this, convert it into a date, and I would need the sales amount. So let me quickly create a new measure for that. I will call it sales amount is equal to sum x orders, and from my orders table I am going to get my quantity, and that will be multiplied by the price. So product price. But you notice that I'm unable to fetch this value, and that's because I would need to use the related function. And if you want a refresher on the related and related table function, I've already created a video on the same. I will leave the link in the description so you can check that out when you feel like you want some a refresher on those two functions. So I will use the related function. I will use the product price column and I'll hit enter. So once I pull this measure on top of this table, this is what I get. So essentially the sales that have happened on the 1st of July are 20,800. The sales that have happened on the 2nd of July are 3,175. For the 3rd of July, they are 5,400. And what I'm looking to achieve here is that for day one, while it was 20,800, for the second day, it was 3,175. For the second day, it was 3,175, and the third day, I believe it was 5,400. So the way I want to see this data is 2,800 and then is equal to 2,0800 plus 3,175. And the third cell should give me is equal to 2,3975 plus 5,400, which is 2,9375. So this is the output that I'm expecting in my output. So I have to create a new measure for that, and let's start building this new measure step by step and understand what's happening here. So let me create this measure and let me call it cumulative sales by day is equal to, so I would need to use the sum x and I would use orders table, and similar to how I calculate the sales amount, I will use the same formula, which is the orders quantity into related products price. Now how do I iterate day over day and create an iterator such that it keeps on accumulating the values one row after the other? So for that, what I'm going to write is I'm going to use the orders function, and I would need the date to get incremented such that when I'm in my first row, I should iterate till the first row. When I'm in my second row, I need to go from the first row till the second row. When I'm in my third row, I should start from the first row and then end at third row. So what do I mean by that? Let's head over to Excel because I've created a beautiful and kind of a visual for that, and that will be very easy to understand. So let's get back to Excel. And so see, when I said that when I'm in my first iteration, I need to start on day one and it should end at day one. When I'm in my second iteration, I should start on day one and end at day two. And accordingly, it has to keep accumulating the values. For example, in my first iteration, it is showing me that the sales amount is 800, which is evident from this particular value. So it is going to feed this value to the sumX function, or you can see at the bottom of the screen. In my second iteration, it is going to start on the 1st of July and then it is going to end on the 2nd of July. And it is going to kind of use both these values and then feed it to my sumX function, and that goes in here, which gives me the output. And similarly, in the third iteration, it starts on the 1st of July and ends on the 3rd of July, stacks up all these values, feeds these values to the sumX function, and then gives me the output. And a similar thing happens through all the iterations, first, second, third, fourth. So what my filter function is essentially doing is, in my first iteration, filter function is filtering only one row. In the second iteration, it is filtering two rows. In the third iteration, it is filtering three rows. In the fourth iteration, it is filtering four rows and then feeding these values to the sumX function. And as these values are being fed to the sumX function, I am going to see the accumulated output. So I will provide this Excel sheet to you as well. So when you are practicing along, you can kind of visualize how the iterations are working along. So let's get back to our Power BI. So in order to achieve that, the way we write the condition is the order date should be such that it is less than or equal to the max of order date. So this essentially enforces a context such that in my first iteration, my orders date and my max orders date is the same. As I move along iteration by iteration, in the second iteration, it is going to stop on the 2nd of July. On the third iteration, it is going to stop on the 3rd of July. Oh, sorry, on the third iteration, it's going to stop on the 3rd of July. And accordingly, in my 10th iteration, it will stop on 10th of July. So let me quickly hit enter and pull this onto my table and see what the output is. So if I pull this cumulative sales, I should get the cumulative sales amount, or not quite. Well, one might argue that I just explained why it should work and it's not working. Well, we missed a very subtle point in that. If you observe in our measure, this orders function is not being wrapped around inside an all function. Now, why do we need an all function? And that because when I'm going to pull out the orders date table from the orders table and this measure from the measure that I just created, this inherent filter context of my date is always going to exist, and that is going to filter the measure as I bring it onto this table. And in order to negate that filter context, I'll have to wrap this orders inside an all function, and the moment I do that, the output is going to be exactly how we want it. And so now we see that the first row is giving us 20,800, the second row is giving us 2,800 plus 3,175, the third row is giving us 23,975 plus 5,400. So this is the first part of our business problems, and we have just successfully solved the first business problem. Now let's go back to the second business problem. So the second problem is that calculate the running total of orders for each supplier. So we are going to use exactly the same logic, the copy paste game. We are simply going to replace the sumX function with the count function, and we are going to get the desired output. So I will quickly copy this, create a new measure, and I will paste it here. So let me copy this and create a new measure and paste. So the only thing that's going to differ here is the count function instead of, because I want to count the number of orders, which means I will have to count the order ID. And I'll close this. Well, I'm getting some error, and what could be the reason? I have to maybe give a comma. Yeah, comma, not a full stop. and close this. And with that, I should get the supplier ID. Okay, I have to change the name. Cumulative orders by supplier. I think that's the question, not. So let's get back to the question once and just understand running total of orders for each supplier. So I need a supplier. So let's get back to our query and pull this value. So I would need the supplier name, and since I want the orders to be based on, okay, the if active supplier is my supplier, then what was the order number of orders processed on 2nd of July, the orders processed on 6th of July, the orders processed on 13th of July, and accordingly, if I pull this cumulative orders by day here, then I should get the cumulative value. Or is it? This is 4. I'm getting 12 orders processed on 6th of July, 26th on the 26th on 13th of July, and 30th on the 4th of July. So let's just check if the output is correct. Let's go back to our supplies table. And so supplier ID 1 is active supplies. Let's check what is the active supplies. Active supply is supplier ID 5. So if I go to the orders table and if I check for, okay, there seems to be something which is missing. Probably, let me just recreate if this table is lost. Supplier ID. I think there was some issue with the supplier ID column. So the supplier ID, let's go back to the visual if it's getting refreshed. Okay, so active supplies has 12 orders on 6th of July, which is the supplier ID 5. So let's select supplier ID 5, and I can see that I'm not getting the correct output. So on 15th of July, it had how many orders? So order ID was 46, order ID 33, which means there's something that's wrong in our logic, which is why even though supplier ID in totality has only processed how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 5 orders. It's giving me some vague output in here. That on 2nd of July it processed 4 orders, on 6th of July it processed 12 orders. Like what's happening? Why is it giving me such vague output? Well, that's because while I did enforce this condition, which is going to give me the cumulative order ID count based on the date, but I did not enforce a context in the filter function that is going to be specific to a supplier ID. So in order to do that, I am going to use an AND condition and use such that the supplier ID from the orders table corresponds to the supplier ID from the supplier table. And once I do that, it is going to take care of the context, and then let's see what we get. So now what I see here is the 2nd of July, it had processed 1 order. On the 6th of July, it had processed 1 plus 1, which is 2 orders. On the 13th of July, it had processed 2 plus 1. I mean, this is the cumulative sum. If I want to see the individual orders processed, I simply have to drag the order ID in this table. So if I drag the order ID in this table and change its summarization to count, so what I get here is, let me just filter by only one supplier so that it becomes much clearer for us to segregate. So let's look for active supplies. So the supplier name in our case is going to be active supplies, and that's also something that we have opened in our table view. So supplier ID 1, supplier ID 5 rather, had one order on 15th, one on 2nd of July, one on 26th, one on 13th, one on 6th. So it never had more than one order on any of its day, which means if I go back to my visual view, then the count of order ID on each day is going to be 1, and the cumulative order by supplier in the date and supplier context is going to be 1, 1 plus 1, 2, 2 plus 1, 3, 3 plus 1, 4, and 4 plus 1, 5. So let's check if we have any supplier who has processed more than one order on each day, and then go back to our table view and verify if we are getting the validation or not. So let me clear this filter, and let's just kind of scroll down a bit and let's see if there is a supplier which has more than one order. Okay, there is this supplier called as Fitness Hub which had processed two orders. And so let's just check for Fitness Hub. Let me select Fitness Hub in here, and let me go to the suppliers table once and check for what is the supplier ID for that particular supplier. Fitness Hub. Fitness Hub is supplier ID 9. I go to my orders table, filter for supplier ID 9, and I see that on 19th of July it had processed two orders. So if I go back to my report view and if I get to see two orders being processed on 19th of July, which means our query is correct. So let's go back and check what was the situation on 19th of July. So 19th of July, I see two orders, and when it's getting aggregated, I'm getting one for day one, two for 10th of July, and two orders being added, which means 2 plus 2, which is 4. So my query is correct, which means we have solved our second business problem as well. Now, please note here that because we are enforcing the running total in the date context, for each supplier. So the moment if I remove the date column from that table, I'm not going to get the correct output. So I need the supplier ID or the supplier name and the date context in order to get the correct output of the rolling count of orders. Now the third query is calculate the, sorry, so the third query is I just have to calculate the cumulative sales up to the current date for each supplier. Now, what we did is we calculated the running count. Now, instead of count, we just replace that count function with the sumX function and we get the same output, or the same requirement is going to get fulfilled. So let's just go back to Power BI, do our usual copy paste game and get the next output. So I will quickly copy this and create a new measure, and I will call it, I'll just paste it first, cumulative sales by supplier, because that's what we want. And now I'll just add this context, which is supply orders, supplier ID is equal to max of supplier ID. And if I click enter, and then if I pull my cumulative sales by supplier, which is this one, onto my visual, and if I pull the sales amount similarly on this visual, so I get to see the difference. So let me just kind of change the column width. So I need the calculator to validate. So on the 8th of July, the sale that was made was 2,600, and on the 10th of July, the sale made was 810, which means in my last column, I should get 2600 plus 810, which is 3410. Okay, that is correct. Now, in my third column or third row, I should get 3410 plus 4205, which is 7615. And in my last row, I should get 7840 by adding 225. So that is correct. So we have thus far solved the three business problems that were given to us. And this brings us to the end of this video. So while this video could be slightly daunting because of the way we are manipulating the data by calculating the running total or the running sales amount, the cumulative sales amount, but you will have access to this particular Excel, and you can go through it and try and figure out and try and understand how these iterations are working, what values are being fed to the filter function, and how that filter function is then returning the value to the sumX function, then accumulating the data and then giving us the correct output. And like I've also demonstrated in the absence of the all function and in the presence of all function, how the output is going to vary. So watch this maybe once, twice, or thrice, go through the Excel sheet And even I kind of keep revising this concept because even after some time, even I kind of tend to forget this. So yeah, I would encourage you to watch this video and go through this Excel sheet. And I hope you enjoyed watching this video. And if you have any feedback, please leave it in the comments. And until then, thanks for watching and happy learning.